A shocker. Zach Wilson will be back in the lineup Sunday when the Jets take on the Detroit Lions. It's a critical game for the Jets' playoff hopes. It's a critical game for Zach Wilson as he looks to turn his career around. We'll talk about all this and more today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, December 16th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free, and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the channel out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Well, the Jets play the Detroit Lions Sunday. Kickoff time is scheduled for 1 o'clock Eastern from MetLife Stadium. And some shocking news came out as Robert Saleh addressed the media on Friday. Zach Wilson will be the starting quarterback for the Jets because Mike White was not cleared medically to play. You probably remember last week, Mike White left the game against the Buffalo Bills twice. Now, he returned both times. The first time did not seem like a serious injury. He very well may have just gotten the wind knocked out of him. But the second time, he had to go to the locker room. And you may remember if you were watching the game, Tony Romo on CBS, a guy who knows a thing or two about hits quarterbacks take, injuries that they deal with. Romo said, there's no way Mike White's returning to the game. Well, Mike White did return to the game and, hit some passes, hit some big passes in the game, even though the Jets lost. But even though Mike White's been preparing all week as though he's going to be the starting quarterback, even though the Jets publicly expressed optimism about Mike White, which, in fairness, we probably should have known better based on the way Robert Saleh's injury reports have gone this year. Saleh always seems to downplay injuries. Mike White's not starting on Sunday, even though, again, he prepared all week. Zach Wilson's back in the lineup. A game that's very important for the Jets as far as their playoff hopes go. Last week, the Jets went into Buffalo, and I told you on Friday that it was not a critical game for their playoff hopes. This one absolutely is. If the Jets lose this game, they're not done, but their playoff hopes take an enormous hit. And it's going to be the former number 2 overall pick, the player who just 3 weeks ago was benched for performance reasons. And earlier in the week, Saleh announced that Zach Wilson was going to be active in this game. He had not been active the last 3 weeks. And I think a lot of that was the Jets were trying to work on some issues Zach Wilson had mechanically and also just mentally. He probably could have used a break. I think we forget how difficult it is to be a young quarterback in this league, but especially in this city, in your early 20s, having everybody just jump all over you, criticize you, hosts like me on podcasts criticize you, talk radio, the media, other media writers. It's not so easy to have the weight of the world on your shoulders. So a mental break for Zach Wilson, but also a lot of mechanical issues that needed to be worked out. And I think it wasn't so much that they were trying to send a message to him that they demoted him to number 3 quarterback. I think as much as anything, what they were trying to do was just take the pressure of any sort of game situation off the table. They did not want Zach Wilson to be focusing on the game plan for that week. They just wanted him to be able to focus on improving the things that needed fixing. Now, I think it goes without saying, and this is just, and maybe I'll say it anyway, Joe Flacco's performance on Sunday played a role in Zach Wilson ascending to the number 2 quarterback role earlier in the week, and now the number 1 role over Flacco with Mike White out, because Joe Flacco was not good against Buffalo. He looked completely finished. Now, I wrote an article earlier this week on GanggreenNation.com where I pointed out that maybe it wasn't quite as bad for Flacco as we initially assessed, where there were some other areas where the Jets failed. But yeah, that's different from saying Flacco played at an acceptable level on Sunday against Buffalo. He did not. And he almost played, I would say he played his way out of the number 2 job with that performance in relief of Mike White. So Zach Wilson almost by default becomes the number 2 quarterback over Flacco. And now with the injury to White, he steps into the number 1 role. It's a bit of a tough spot from the standpoint that, again, White's been preparing all week to be the starting quarterback. And most of the game plan is implemented Wednesday and Thursday, and that's when you practice with the first team. So I'm sure the Jets will try and get Zach Wilson all the reps they can today. They'll probably do some extra work. They'll probably just run some plays over again. But it's difficult when you're not preparing to be the number one quarterback all week, and you suddenly have to step into the lineup. And that's something the Jets benefited from earlier this season when they played the Miami Dolphins. Teddy Bridgewater, who prepared all week to be the starter for Miami, got injured on the first play of the game, and Skylar Thompson has to go in and pretty much ran none of the plays with the first team offense that week. Now, Skylar Thompson also has talent issues, so that's part of the that was part of the equation why the Jets played so well that day and why Skylar Thompson played so poorly. But from that standpoint, it's a bit of a tough spot for Zach Wilson. But you know what? And so on another level, I don't know how many excuses you can make. He's had a couple weeks to get things straightened out. He should be in a better mental place. I don't know how much they could fix those mechanical issues, but we're going to find out on Sunday. And he's playing against a team that he should have success against, because Detroit is not a great defense either in the passing game or the running game. So this is really set up for Zach Wilson. And I understand, again, I acknowledge the lack of number reps with the first team. I acknowledge the mechanical issues. But we've seen Zach Wilson at times this year at least play credible football. Now, unfortunately, we haven't seen him do better than credible football, and we've seen him play some really bad games. But despite all the issues that I've mentioned, this opponent just is an opponent that Zach Wilson should play decently against. I'm not expecting Zach Wilson to play like Mike White did against the Chicago Bears, but if you can't play well against Detroit right now, and Detroit's a very hot team, but this defense is still not that good. And you got the run game to lean on. Detroit's not that good against the run. You got Bam Knight to lean on in this game. So there's a lot here pointing to me that the threshold for Zach Wilson should be to play a decent game. Maybe like the way he played against Miami, where it wasn't a dynamic game statistically, but he played efficient enough football. He hit the throws when the Jets needed him to do it. And the game against Buffalo, the Jets' upset win over the Bills in the Meadowlands early in November, where he only threw for 150, 160 yards, but he was efficient. He got to his first read. He got the ball where it needed to go. Zach Wilson is a limited quarterback at this point. I mean, he's going to struggle once he gets past his first read, but what you want to see him to do is when the first read's open, get him the ball. Don't backpedal out of the pocket. If your first read's not there and you have a running lane, take off. Zach Wilson's not a tremendous runner, but he's a guy who can get some yardage that's put in front of him. And lean on the run game, lean on the defense. And this should be enough for the Jets to win. I said this yesterday when I was chatting with Matt Derry, the host of Locked On Lions. We did our weekly crossover show yesterday. This is a game that if you want to be a playoff team, whether Mike White's the starting quarterback or whether Zach Wilson's the starting quarterback, you got to find a way to win this game. Detroit's maybe hot. Detroit's not an elite level team, though. They're a decent team. This is not by any stretch of the imagination an easy game for the New York Jets, but at the end of the day, I think this is a game you got to win if you want to be a playoff team. In your building in December, 7-6. The schedule not easy down the stretch, but the toughest games are now in the rearview mirror. I mean, even with all of the caveats I've thrown out there, I don't think the Jets need spectacular quarterback play. I've been saying that most of the year. Most weeks the Jets are not going to need spectacular quarterback play. They're going to be decent. They're going to need decent quarterback play, and I think it's reasonable to expect decent quarterback play from Zach Wilson this week. Now, part of the reason for that is we know the Jets are very talented on the defensive side of the ball. As we continue this Friday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about some of the things the Jets are going to need to get from their defense in this game. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Tommy John. The holiday season is here. I'm usually a last-minute shopper. This year I've been a little bit better. I got all my shopping done in advance, but I know a lot of you out there are still pushing things. You still haven't made your purchases for gifts yet. Well, you should think about Tommy John. In Tommy John, you're that much more comfortable. You can do everything better. Shop Tommy John's Wrap It Up sale right now and give the gift of comfort to everyone on your list, including yourself, with new Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. With over 18 million pairs sold, giving Tommy John has become a holiday tradition. 97% of women and men love getting a gift from Tommy John. That's why Tommy John doesn't have customers. They have fanatics. Celebrate softness season with the gift of new Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. Every gift is backed by Tommy John's best apparel you'll ever wear, or it's free guarantee. Hurry to Tommy John's Wrap It Up sale and get 30% off everything, plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. Order now so your gifts arrive before the holidays. 30% off plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. This show is free and available on all platforms. Jets play the Detroit Lions Sunday at MetLife Stadium, 1 o'clock. Obviously, today, most of the attention's on the quarterback position because Robert Saleh surprised everybody. The Jets proceeded all week as though Mike White was going to be the starting quarterback, but the doctors did not clear Mike White, and that's what the doctors are there for. Doctors are there to prevent players from getting on the field if they're going to endanger themselves. Players always want to play. That's part of being a competitor, but sometimes the doctors need to step in and say, hey, this is not a good idea. So Zach Wilson will start at quarterback on Sunday for the Jets, most of the attention being focused on him. But I think we're going back to the old formula. When Zach Wilson started earlier in this year, the formula was never for the Jets to be a quarterback-dependent team. The formula was for the Jets to lean on the other aspects of their team because the quarterback was not the strength. The strength mainly was the defense. And on that side of the ball, the Jets may have an issue this Sunday because Quinnen Williams may not play. He has not practiced all week. He's got that calf injury he suffered against Buffalo. Now, I'm not a doctor and I'm not examining him, so I try and be very hesitant in situations like this, but my general view is the Jets should play it safe with Quinnen Williams. This player is way too important to the future of the franchise for them to risk him if he's going to go out there and injure himself worse. I mean, first of all, you have the immediate considerations where Jets are still in the playoff race. So you don't want to send Quinnen Williams out there if he's at serious risk for injuring himself worse and you're going to miss him for a longer period of time. But beyond that, when you think about the year Quinnen Williams has had, he looks like a guy who's going to be a centerpiece of this franchise for the next 6 to 8 years. And one game, as important as it is for the Jets to win, as important as it is for the Jets to make the playoffs, this one game, this 1 year is just not worth risking Quinnen Williams. So I have no knowledge of Quinnen Williams' injury. I have zero medical background, but I think in general, the Jets should be conservative with Quinnen Williams. And in a weird way, maybe this is not the worst game for Quinnen to miss. And it's a weird thing to say because Detroit's offense has been so good lately, and their offensive line is actually pretty decent. But the one area where they've got a little issue, and Matt Derry again mentioned this yesterday, is the right guard position. And we don't, they've had some injuries there. It could be Logan Stenberg in there, who's really struggled when he's been in the lineup this season. So you may say to me, well, John, what are you talking about? If right guard's the weakness, how can you say that it's okay to lose your star defensive tackle? Well, this year, and the Jets do change things up a little bit, but for the most part, this is relative to the rest of the league. The Jets don't do the same thing on defense 100% of the time, but relative to the rest of the league, the Jets are kind of like a defense where they're not really trying to fool you. They stick their guys out there, and they say, you know what we're going to do. You can't beat us. And for the most part this year, they've been right. More often, Quinnen Williams lines up over the left guard than the right guard. The right guard's going to be the guy Sheldon Rankins sees a lot this week. And Sheldon Rankins is having the year I thought he was going to have last year. Last year, you may remember if you've been a listener for 2 years or so, I was very excited when the Jets signed Sheldon Rankins back in 2021. And there was a lot of buzz across the league that the Jets, got a player a lot of teams were interested in, that people felt like Sheldon Rankins had taken a little bit of time to recover from his Achilles injury, but he was about to become the dynamic player he was in New Orleans in 2018. And then last year came and he really wasn't. He was awful against the run. He had some moments as a pass rusher, but Rankins was one of the biggest disappointments to the point where I said the Jets should cut him over the course of the offseason. Well, thank goodness they didn't listen to me because Sheldon Rankins has bounced back and had a very good season for the Jets. He is looking like a guy who, a good sidekick to Quinnen Williams. But this is the kind of week where he is going to need to take center stage. When your star is out, your second guy really needs to step up and play effective football. So if the Jets win this game, I think it's going to be a Sheldon Rankins kind of game. I think it's going to be a kind of game where he goes out there and plays great. Jared Goff has been very good from clean pockets this year. Not so much. If you and this has always been the case with Goff. I think when you take the perfect conditions away from Goff, you can run into some trouble as an offense. And I think Sheldon Rankins is going to, he's the guy the Jets need to step up. But I like this matchup for the Jets. I think that as good as Detroit is playing on offense, and even without Quinn and Williams, the Jets have those corners. The Jets have the corners who can match up with the Detroit receivers. Even though Detroit's offense is playing really well, I don't see a dynamic big play receiver in this offense. And I say that with all due respect because they have a guy who's playing very effectively, Mr. St. Brown, who's putting together a tremendous season. But I think the Jets' corners are going to match up with these guys well. The guy who really would have worried me, but they traded him, was T.J. Hawkinson. But that was the guy when I saw this matchup earlier in the season before the trade to Minnesota. That was the guy who really worried me because we know the Jets have issues at the linebacker position and the safety position covering. That was the area where I saw a potential problem. Of course, the Jets saw him a couple of weeks ago when they played the Minnesota Vikings. But I think that this is a pretty good matchup for the Jets defense. Of course, any given Sunday, and Detroit again is very hot, and Jared Goff's playing excellent football. But even without Quinn and Williams, again, I can't make excuses for the Jets right now. As much as the Jets face issues in this game, as much as they're banged up, I keep going back to one point. This is still a game. It may not be a walk in the park. It's still a game that very winnable for the Jets, even with all of their issues because of the way they match up with this Detroit team. And a big part of this matchup is going to be in the run game on the offensive side of the ball. Bam Knight is playing tremendous football. As we close out this episode of the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what we may expect from the Jets' run game on Sunday against the Detroit Lions. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Total Wine and More. This holiday season, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite Cabernet or Chardonnay, or the perfect gift for everyone on your list with some help from a friendly guide. And with all the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price. Love what you find, only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Drink responsibly and be 21. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. We're talking about Jets-Lions, 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon at MetLife Stadium. A game the Jets need to win. If you're of the mindset like I am that 10 wins probably gets you into the playoffs and less than 10 wins probably doesn't, and I understand the Jets are right now behind in the tiebreakers to New England and the Chargers, but none of these teams is really that great. And I include the Jets in that. These are teams that are decent teams. They're probably low-end playoff teams, but 3-1 probably gets you in against this competition. It may not. I mean, there are scenarios where the Jets get 10 and don't make the playoffs, but I have to think 10 wins get you in. And that's why this game's so critical, because the Jets are at 7 with 3 to go. So they got to win 3 out of 4. If you lose this game, then you probably have to win 3 in a row. And a 3-game winning streak's never easy to put together, even though the Jets put together a 4-game winning streak earlier this season. Just tough to do. But also, if you look at the schedule, Detroit's not that easy. But you got trips to Seattle. You got a trip to Miami, road games. Seattle's not playing well, but always a tough road venue to go to. And then Miami, a solid football team. A very good football team, a team the Jets have beat once this year, but with a third-string quarterback in the lineup for Miami. I think realistically on paper, this game and the Thursday night game against Jacksonville, if you're going to get 3 wins, you got to get both of them. Because, first of all, these are 2 games at home. And second of all, these are teams that are not easy outs, but relatively speaking, it's going to be tough to win those 2 road games back-to-back. So I think this is a critical game for the Jets. And fortunately, I think they match up well with Detroit in a number of ways. One of which is, I think the Lions are going to have a tough time with the Jets' run game. Bam Knight's really helped the Jets kind of figure things out. When Breece Hall went down, I was optimistic about Michael Carter. I was optimistic about James Robinson. They had their moments, most notably that drive that won the game against Buffalo, where the Jets pretty much ran the ball the entire time. They hit 1 pass that entire drive. It was a drive that took them from their own 4-yard line into field goal range. And there have been a couple other moments here or there, but Michael Carter's just, let's be honest, Michael Carter's having a bad second season. He is not playing at the level he did a year ago. And James Robinson, he's left yards on the field. He has not been the player the Jets were hoping for. He's not the player who was so good a couple of years ago in Jacksonville as he recovers from, as he still, I guess, is rehabbing from it, or not rehabbing, but he's still showing some lingering effects of that injury he suffered. Well, suddenly Bam Knight gets into the lineup, and there have been lots of reasons I've liked the job Robert Saleh has done this year, but one of the things that I absolutely love is he plays the guy he thinks is the best player. Now, you can disagree with Robert Saleh's assessment of who the best player is, but I don't think there's any doubt, and the quarterback situation is a good example of this. I don't think there's any doubt that he plays the guy who he thinks is the best player, and he does not let things like draft status, he does not worry about contracts, he does not worry about what the Jets have invested in the player. He plays the most talented player. In the last couple of weeks, Bam Knight has been excellent. He's shown a little bit of everything. He's shown some toughness running inside, shown an ability to make guys miss in space, shown an ability to catch the ball, and yeah, he's even shown he's got maybe a second gear. So Bam Knight's been the total package so far. He's producing big plays for the Jets. He's making tough runs. He's stabilized the run game in a way it really hasn't been stabilized since Breece Hall got hurt. And that was such a huge injury for the Jets because Breece Hall was playing at a Rookie of the Year level. It's funny because Garrett Wilson's right in the mix for Rookie of the Year. He's going to be probably in the top 3 of votes if he doesn't win it. If Breece Hall doesn't get injured, Breece Hall may be running away with the Rookie of the Year. In fact, I would even say I would expect Breece Hall to be running away with Rookie of the Year right now. So the Jets, you can make a case the Jets have had maybe the 2 best offensive rookies on their in the entire league on their team this year. And you add that with Sauce Gardner, who's got a great shot at winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. It's an amazing draft class the Jets have had. Well, you may have to include Bam Knight in that draft class because he was an undrafted free agent signing. And there was all this talk in training camp about how he was kind of turning heads, and it was just kind of a numbers game for Bam, where there just wasn't enough space because the Jets had Breece and they had Carter, and for whatever reason they had Ty Johnson in there. Now he's gotten his opportunity. And it's good for Robert Saleh. When things weren't working well in the run game, it would have been very easy for Saleh to say, we have faith in Carter, we have faith in Robinson. These are guys we've invested in. Saleh saw that Bam Knight was a better option. He went to him against that Chicago Bears game, and has never looked back. And I think that this is a bad Detroit run defense. I mean, I don't think there's any other way around it. And I think with Zach Wilson in the lineup, the Jets, even though the game plan is set, they're going to want to protect Zach Wilson. One way to do that is through the run game. And when you run the ball effectively, it makes life so much easier on your quarterback. You look at the games Zach Wilson's played efficiently this year. Generally speaking, he's gotten a pretty good performance from his run game. He had that Buffalo game where the Jets ran the ball so effectively on the game-winning drive. The Miami game was a big game for Breece Hall. I think when you get production from the running back position, and a lot of that production in the Miami game was actually Zach Wilson passing to Breece Hall. Breece Hall was kind of a good option for Zach Wilson in that game, and Bam Knight showed an ability to catch the football out of the backfield. When you have your running back helping you out, it makes quarterback play a lot easier. It makes you much more efficient as a passer. It gives you a peace of mind because you know that if all else fails, I can just get it to my running back and count on him to make some good plays. So I think that Bam Knight's going to be very beneficial for Zach Wilson. I think it'll be very beneficial for the Jets. In a game the Jets need to win. I don't think there's any way around it. I'm not going to say the Jets are done if they lose on Sunday, but the playoffs become much more difficult to get to. Hopefully the Jets pull it out with Zach Wilson at quarterback. It's a chance for him to reclaim his starting job. And we'll find out what happens. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're listening on a podcast source, or a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. These things help the channel out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the game. We'll be back after it to talk about what happened.